No one needs to tell hospital executive teams that it's a tough time to be in the hospital business. Americans are aging out of the lucrative commercial payer market into lower-paying government programs like Medicare and Medicaid. Input costs are rising, payers are pushing back against needed increases, and the cost of capital is at a 40-year high. Competition comes from all sides, as Professor Porter taught us all in business school, but there is only one that really matters to hospital CFOs. And it's not the rival facility across town. More heads and beds are not going to solve the financial pressures. New entrants are less of a threat in a capital-intensive business of facility care, especially as more patients are covered by government programs. New drugs, implantable devices, labor costs, and capital costs are all suppliers of some kind. And while they compete for the healthcare dollar, most hospitals are price takers rather than price makers. Sure, there's a lot of buzz about hospital at home and alternative places of care, but these are macro forces to adapt to rather than compete with. The real competitor to hospitals is the buyers, which of course means the insurers. Let's look at why that's the case. The healthcare dollar for insured products is the premium dollar, from which about 85% goes to the direct provision of care, and the rest is a blend of administration and profit. Break it down further, and we see that about 39% of the total premium goes to hospitals, 22% goes to the costs of medications, 12% for physician services, and the remaining 12% for all other medical costs. Things like home health, DME, hospice, therapies, etc. With that as a backdrop, let's now look at health plan math and hospital math. We'll use a Medicare Advantage with a Part D plan in the South, where you can still find plans for about $900 per member per month. For a plan operating with 10% overhead and 85% spent on the claims, that leaves about 5% in profit, or $45 PMPM. For a health system, 39% of the premium is $351. With margins at just 1.1%, that's just $3.86 PMPM, or just under $4, compared to $45. But that's not the only math problem. Commercial insurers pay considerably more than government programs, but employees covered by their employers have been dropping for more than 2 decades. This is somewhat due to demographics as the baby boomers retire and enter Medicare. Medicaid is also growing as poverty rates rise, and older people in poverty become dual eligibles. The erosion of commercial to government programs results in about a 0.5% impact to net margins for every 1% shift. In many rural markets, that 1% shift is happening annually. To recap, Medicare Advantage is a growing market and a direct-to-consumer market. A plan with good benefits, great quality, and the patient's doctors in the network, and you have a winning product. Competing for the premium dollar is the only chance to mitigate the crushing effects of the payer mix shift. Competing for volume is a losing strategy, as evidenced by the abysmal state of the industry. What does it take to position for long-term stability? You must have solid population health credentials. Value-based agreements may be necessary to focus the organization, but just contracting with payers is not going to be sufficient for a dozen reasons. Focus on Medicare, administrative services for self-insured clients. Be very cautious about taking risk in commercial. It's a place where hospitals can get hurt. Buy, build, or partner with a risk-bearing entity where the parties have aligned interests. That typically excludes traditional payers, but not always. Let's shift now to the build and a high-level view of the elements to build this. Most systems have some form of a network, and if it was originally built for a Medicare shared savings program, there's likely a reasonable governance structure in place. These are well suited for doing value-based contracting for quality bonuses, or pay for performance where cost and quality produce gain share opportunities, burnout downside risk. Models with a mix of providers from different organizations tend to find common ground, shared vision, and contribute more resources. And working together collaboratively can lead to effective business or clinical integration structures. These entities are better equipped to take risk via bundles, maybe service line capitation or even global capitation. The term global is in quotes here because it's a misnomer. We don't have the time here to cover that, so this must be a discussion for another time. Still, if these assets are developed and evolved to be high-performing, then why stop there? By adding a risk-bearing entity to the assets, a viable business operation emerges that can have significant and positive strategic implications. If you haven't been too close to this topic, an RBE is an entity designed to assume insurance risk. It can be an existing entity, but usually it's a special purpose entity. They can be very broad or very narrow in operations, in scope and scale. Ultimately, the form follows the function required in the strategic direction setting. Central to the design is the reasons to create one. Old insurance execs love to say risk is risky, not clever, but certainly accurate. Simply put, it's a well-designed RBE can carry the risk without risking the parent organization. It can insulate the system from ratings agencies who are increasingly concerned about risk assumption. As a separate asset or company, it provides the CFO with flexibility for various forms of future transactions or future M&A activity. I like to think of RBEs as a wraparound entity that provides risk mitigation for the system. Looking at the various functions that create readiness to manage populations, the RBE essentially supports and backs up these functions with risk reserves, access to capital, operational capabilities, and stop-loss insurance capabilities. There is a lot of planning required, but the road is well known to veterans in this space. It requires contemplation on ownership, structure, how it will be governed, managed, operated, and how it relates to the parent. As you might expect, it takes people, processes, technology, and capital to build these capabilities. And while it's a lot of work, it's imminently possible. We've been involved in builds that included more than a dozen hospitals and thousands of physicians. Although most begin when a few partners come together, and typically the core aspects are very similar even when the geography, markets, and objectives vary. In many cases, we've even found how the system can fund the work without incurring new expenses. Music to the ears of CEOs and CFOs alike. I hope this flyover was helpful, and while such a topic often leaves more questions than answers, drop a message with questions and we'll do our best to answer them for you. Many thanks for your time and attention.